Hello everyone. Before we get into the details of using InDesign features for creating interactivity, let's just spend a few minutes talking about what kinds of interactive objects you can create with InDesign and how they are different from regular objects in your layout. There are three kinds of InDesign objects that exist just for interactivity. They are buttons, multi-state objects, and form fields. In this particular movie, we're going to be focusing on buttons, and then in future movies, we will be looking at multi-state objects and form fields. Now, these are not the only things that you can work with for interactivity in InDesign. You also have the ability to create animations, and you have the ability to create, to control sounds and movie clips if you bring them in. But the interactivity part, when you're interacting with these elements, is usually done through buttons. Now, as you probably figured out by now in the class, most of the things that we do when we talk about interactivity, we do through buttons or symbols or objects that are buttons that represent buttons within our applications. So it's no different when we're working in this environment in InDesign that we work in the same way. So let's take a look at this document that I have open here. Having selected it, let's go ahead and go to its page, to the Pages panel, and you will notice that the document is a 4-page long document. It's based on the iPad format, which is what we've been working with throughout the class. And it has elements in each one of the pages. It's supposed to be kind of like a recipe book. And if I scroll through the pages, you will notice two things. Number one, that they all share the same background image. And number two, that they all seem to have some type of navigation at the bottom. Some kind of buttons at the bottom to allow you to go from page to page. And this is in fact the simplest form of navigation that you find in InDesign when you're creating InDesign documents, something that you can create both for EPUB export and for interactive PDF export. The format is pretty much, and the workflow is pretty much the same for both interactive PDF and EPUB when it comes to page navigation. So now the trick is to actually create the buttons to create the navigation. So let's get started. To do this, I am going to create me a new document, pressing Control N on the keyboard or going File, New Document. And I'm going to use the iPad format that I've been using throughout the semester. Now I'm going to turn off that primary text. I don't need it. And then I'll click Create. Now that's just going to give me the first page. And remember that that first page is based on the A master. That means that if I add something to that master, it will be replicated on any page that shares that same master. So I will change the master by double clicking on it to activate it. To get into it, you'll notice down on the bottom left hand corner of the application that we're inside the A master. So if I drop in or if I import, if I place an image in this page, in the master page, it will appear in any page that will be in any subsequent page that will be made out of that master. So I'll go ahead and press Control D or Command D on the Mac, or go File, Place, whichever one is the way that you get to placing things. You can go File, Place, or Control D for the shortcut. And I'm going to use this particular shortcut here. Now you'll notice that I didn't create a box to receive this document. I didn't create a frame to receive the document. I simply said Place. And what that gives me is the ability to click and drag to place the item where I want to place it at the size that I want to place it. So if I go to the upper left hand corner of my stage or of my paper, of my page, click and drag across, you'll notice that I'm dragging a box that is constrained by the size of the document that I'm importing. And I can drag down all the way to the bottom so that it fits all the way to the height of my screen. Of my page. Sorry, when I let go, my image gets imported into that frame that I created, and it's been resized to fit within that particular frame. Now let me move the right side of that box, and you'll notice that I'm simply changing the container, not the image itself, so it's not resizing the image. And that is because I didn't press Control Shift as I was dragging that. So now that I have resized the box to fit the background, I have everything set up to work on my files. You'll notice that my A master contains the image, that's where I'm working, and automatically my page one already has that image in it. Now if I'm thinking of creating a layout with this as the background, you will automatically know that it's too contrasty to place any actual content in here. So if I have text that is going to be, say, on top of those muffins or on top of anything that has high contrast versus the light background, then it's forcing me to start thinking of workflows in design that will force me to create background colors for my text boxes and things like that. So I want to avoid that. I want to have everything as clean as possible. To do that, I want to reduce the opacity of the image, of the actual image, not of the container, not of the frame, but the image. So remember, to reduce the size of the image, of the content of any frame, I need to select the content itself. To do that, I can either click on that circle that appears here, that little white circle in the middle of the screen. Now you guys don't see it in this video, but you will see it when you open up the application and you roll over the center area of an image. You will see a little white circle. The reason why you don't see it is because of my capturing software is blocking that feature from showing up in InDesign. But you will see it. So you'll notice that my cursor turns into a hand, so that means I am over that circle. If I click in that circle, my selection turns to that light brown, which indicates that I have selected the image. And if I change the properties right now, I will be changing the properties of that image. Versus if let me select the black arrow, click on the pasteboard to deselect everything. If I click on the image itself outside of that center area, you will notice that now my selection is the blue outline of my frame. So remember, the frame is the container is separate from the content. The content is the image, the container is the frame, and they're completely separate. So I want to just modify the transparency of the content of the image itself. So I'll select the image either by clicking on that circle or by using the white arrow tool and clicking on the image anywhere, and that selects the image with the direct selection tool. So with that selected, I'm going to go to its properties, and then I'm going to change its opacity to about 50% so that it is toned down and I can see kind of like a whitewash across the entire thing, which is going to make any black text pop when I place text in my text boxes. I also want to create some sort of a halo effect. And to do that, I'm going to take advantage of the fact that my background is white and that I can create a feathering effect in the container itself. So for that, I'm going to switch to my black arrow tool, click on the pasteboard anywhere to deselect, and then select the actual container. You'll notice that it is the container because I see the blue selection around my image. That means I have selected the frame, the container. Then I'm going to right click and I am going to go into effects, and I am going to be using a basic feather effect. Actually, yeah, let's use a basic feather. No, let's not use a basic feather effect. Let's use a, let's see, the directional feather is what gives us the ability to create feathering all around the image, directional feathering. So I'm going to make sure that my feathering is all the same values from top, bottom, left, and right on this. So as I increase, let me go ahead and hit preview here. You'll notice that I'm getting that feathering around the edges. So I'm going to go to a significant number, like something like that, something like 50 pixels. I also want to make sure that I am choosing leading edges instead of first edge only, or I can also choose all edges and it will be basically the same thing as what you're looking at right here, the result. I don't want to choke it because I think I like the feathering effect that's a little bit light, and I like the fact that it is almost completely white at the bottom, which is where my button navigation is going to go. Maybe I want to increase that a little bit. So let's say, for example, I only want to increase the bottom portion. Then deselect that, make all the same settings by clicking on it, and then increase only the bottom portion. And you'll notice that only the bottom is changing, the other ones remain the same. So if I maintain that to, let's say, 120 pixels, that's a good value, and I like the way that looks as overall for presentation purposes. So I'll just go ahead and click OK on that, and you'll notice that the presentation looks fairly good. Let's go ahead and press the W key to see what this looks like in preview, and it looks good. So with that in mind, let's go back to pages, and let's see what it looks like on the page. It looks exactly the same. So now anytime I want to create a new page, all I have to do is just simply drag a new page from the master, and they will all share the same background. That's number one in my design. The second thing I want to do is I want to create a navigation that goes across all of the pages. And the navigation in the sample document basically happened at the bottom of the pages, and they all seem to have the same navigation. So that tells me that this is probably a button that is telling the document to go to the previous page or to the next page. And to do that, I want to create, obviously, a button graphic. So how do I do that? Well, let's go back to where we're working. And before I actually start, notice that the buttons are all across the entire document in the same place, except for the first page, which only has one button, and the last page. Oh, the last page actually has two buttons. Okay, so it's only the first page that has one button. So we can override that from the master page. But because these seem to be the same navigation across all pages, chances are they come from the master page. So I'm going to go back to my master page, and I'm going to create those buttons inside this area in my application. Or actually, I'll put them on this side. So with that done, let's go ahead and create a button really quick by using my rectangle tool. So I'm going to choose the rectangle tool, and I'm going to give it a fill color when I draw my rectangle. So let's go ahead and draw a rectangle here. I'm pressing shift as I go. I'm going to make my rectangle about 44 pixels. Then I'm going to give it a color, and I am going to choose, I'm going to create me a new color. I am going to create something like a light brown or something like that. Let's play around with the settings here until I find a color that is sort of what I like. I want, it's kind of like almost like a flowery color for this. I don't want it to pop too much, but I want it to be clean enough that it fits with the color scheme. And so for this, in this case, this seems to be okay. This kind of like a tan color. So let's go ahead and click OK on that. We're done with that. And now to turn this into an arrow, what I did is I went ahead and rotated that box. And then I used my pen tool. From the pen tool, remember that you have options to add anchors and remove anchors from graphics. So if I choose the delete anchor from here, I can go ahead and click on any of the anchors, and that anchor will be removed, and you have basically the graphic of an arrow. Now you can create more stylized arrows for your navigation, but for this example, this will be sufficient. Let me actually make that slightly smaller. It's a bit big, so let's go ahead and make it smaller. Now actually I can resize it from its properties here, and I want to make it about 30 pixels. Okay. I make sure that when I selected it, this was constrained. The sizes were constrained by clicking on these little links, and now that button's about 30 pixels. Now I can use that same graphic for another button. So I'll go ahead and make a copy of this by selecting it and going Command or Control C, then Control V to paste it. Another way to do a copy of something in InDesign is the same way as in Photoshop. I mean in Illustrator, sorry. You can select the item and then press Control Shift and Alt at the same time. Control, Shift, and Alt. And basically it allows you to make a copy. Actually, the shortcut is only two keys. It's Shift and Alt, and then you can click and drag. The reason why I press Control is because it maintains items aligned in the same axis. And so now I can go ahead and turn that around, and that becomes my arrow pointing in the other direction. So this will be my navigation. These will be my two navigation items. I'm going to align them to the bottom margin, and that's where my navigation will be. Then what I want to do at this point is I want to program navigation values into those things, meaning I need to turn them into buttons. So to turn an item into a button, anything can be a button, by the way, an image, a graphic, anything, any object that has a container can be turned into a button. So to do that, what I want to do is first I want to switch my view from the Essentials format in which I am working right now to digital publishing. Now, when you click digital publishing, yours might not look like mine. Let me go ahead and reset this really quick. Reset digital publishing so that we are basically starting from the same point. So yours will look somewhat like this. Let me go ahead and the one thing that I need you to do at this point is one of the items that doesn't show here that you will need in order to preview what we're creating is the interactive viewport. And you do that by going under Window, Interactive, in EPUB Interactivity Preview. You want to open up that window. Then you want to grab that tab and you want to move it right above the animation up here. You want to move it in there so that it's integrated within that menu. So it's fairly simple to do. Simply, when it's expanded, let's expand it really quick. Click on the tab name, drag it, and you see those little blue lines that indicate where you're going to drop that menu. And so once you drop it up there, it will stay up there. Once you've done that, go ahead and click on it to open it, and then drag from the bottom left-hand corner to increase it to be as large as possible. You want your navigation to mimic what your actual application is going to look like on the device. So you want to see it as big as possible. So you have it, once you stretch that out to make it as big as possible, click on the actual button again to close it, and then that's been set up already. As you probably noticed, there's a lot of things here that have to do with interactivity in InDesign, and we're going to talk about all of these. But for now, we're going to be focusing on buttons, which is right here, buttons and forms. So to create a button is fairly simple. All you got to do is just select the item that you want to make a button, and then you go to that menu, and then choose to make it whatever you want to make it. So in this case, I want to make the type for this is going to be button. It's the topmost selection. Then it allows you to give it a name, which I'm going to give it the name of previous. And then it tells you what event, what's the listener, what am I listening to? So this is exactly the same thing as what we were doing when we were talking about ActionScript. You have actions that are looking for mouse actions, mouse clicks, mouse rollovers, and things. These are basically the events that you're looking for in this particular program. They're all mouse actions. So it's asking you, what do you want? Do you want it to be on a click, on the release? What is the listener? What am I listening for? What is the event that is going to trigger this? In this case, I want release on tab, and then it's going to tell me what action do you want to do when you click on that button. What do you want it to do? Well, from that plus menu right next to the actions, you get to choose what you want to do. The items on the upper portion of that drop-down menu are specific to they work both for PDF and for EPUB export. The ones under EPUB only are the ones that work just for EPUBs, and the ones under PDF only are the ones that work just for PDFs. For the most part, the things for PDFs that are down here have to do with forms. The ones up here have to do with actual navigation and interactivity for EPUBs. The ones for PDF are only for forms for the most part. And then the ones that are shared are basically what we're going to be working with for this specific example. And what I want to do from those actions is I want to choose go to either next page or last page or whatever it is, wherever it is that you want that arrow to point. In my case, it's going to the previous page, so I'll select that from the options. You will notice that when I did that, down here I have three states for my button. And they include a normal state, which is the up state in the buttons in Adobe Animate, rollover, which is basically my over state in Animate, click, which is the mouse down or when I'm pressing on the button in Animate, and then this, based on the artwork size, that's the actual hotspot, the actual area where the button will be. So anything that is within that graphic will be the button. So it doesn't need a fourth state for that in this case. Now, we can go ahead and activate this just simply by doing that. You can actually add an overstate. So if you want to create an overstate or rollover state, all you need to do is just click on the rollover state and it will make a copy of the normal state. But because that rollover is selected, it allows you to click on the item, double click to enter it, and then if you want to change the properties for that object, you can go ahead and do that at this point. So if I want to go up here and change the properties for that button when people roll over it, let's say I want to make it a different color, let's say fuchsia, then that's what's going to happen. And now that's a really ugly color. Let me actually choose a new color for this. Let me see if I can go ahead and enter a different color. Something I just want to make it a little bit of a burnt orange perhaps. Yeah, that's better. And I want to just go ahead and keep those values here and click OK. So that's going to be my rollover color. So if I go back to my button menu, this is my normal, that's my rollover. So you'll notice that there is a slight change in the color of the object. So that is how you create the rollover state for that button. Let's repeat the exact same steps for the other button, for the moving forward, for the next page. So I'll select the object. From the type, I will choose button. I will name it next. And I will say I want the event that triggers this to be the release. Then I'm going to choose the action to go to the next page. And I am going to go ahead and click on rollover to make a copy. double click on the object on the stage, on the paper, on the page to to get into it so that I can change the color of it. Then I'm going to choose from the drop down menu. Hopefully I saved the values for this, and I did not save the values. So let's see if I can use my eyedropper tool to select the color of the other one. And I probably can't. I cannot. So I'm going to go ahead, and I should have saved that swatch, and I apologize for that. Let's see if I can go ahead. Let me just go ahead and change these values, and I'm going to save. Actually, I'm going to maintain those values. I want to make sure that I remember those values. So let me double click it here. I'm going to choose that color right there. And let's go back, click on the black arrow, click on the normal. So that's basically the rollovers are going to have different colors. Now I can pick that color for the rollover on this one if I click on the rollover and maintain it there. So you'll notice that I didn't go back to normal. Then I'm going to select the other object, and I'm going to go to its rollover state. Double click on the rollover, and now I'm going to use the eyedropper to pick that color. Then I go back to normal on that object, go back to the previous button, and press normal as well, so that we go back to the beginning state of everything. Those will be my my buttons for this application, for what I'm working on. So now that we have this set up, all we gotta do is populate the different pages with the content that we want to go through on each page. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring in 4 images. Let's go to let me close that buttons menu for just a second. As a matter of fact, we're gonna talk about buttons in more detail in the next video. There's a lot of things that you can do with buttons, such as show buttons, hide buttons, that allows you to create a lot of interactivity by simply using buttons, buttons to control buttons. So let's close that for now. Let's go to the pages menu, and let me go ahead and jump into my project itself and put a different image on each one of those pages. So I have 4 pages, so let's go into the actual document, and I'm on page 1. You will notice that if I click and drag, I am not able to select any of the objects that I have because they're available right now because they come from the master page. But we're gonna have to override that button on the first page and this button on the last page, so that I'm not telling the user that they can go back or forward past those pages. So I need to override that in just a second. But first, let's bring in the images. So I'm gonna go ahead and place 4 images. I'm gonna use the same images that I've been using for the other samples, these 4 images. And what I want to do is bring each one of them at a time. So I'm gonna go ahead, and the first one will be the panna cotta here. Let me actually place it right on this side. Boom. So that's a good place for that. Let's go ahead and place this one here. Boom. Boom. And boom. So now, let's say, for example, as you notice, all of my images are kind of iffy. They don't fit properly. I don't know if they're aligned. They don't seem to be aligned. So I just eyeball this thing. Let's say I want to have something that guides me on how to do this. Well, let me just go ahead and undo all these steps so that I don't have the images on memory. And I want to have a guideline. Notice that my interface has rulers, just like in Photoshop or Illustrator. So if I press Control R or Command R on the Mac, you will be revealing those rulers. And remember, just like in Illustrator or in on the Mac, or Photoshop, you can go ahead and click and drag from those rulers to create guides. And so the guides will be available to you. But in this case, once again, I need a guide that is present in all the pages. So I'll go to the master page. And once I'm inside the master page, I'll create a guide as to how wide I want that image to take. So I want it to take about this much width. I want it to be up to that point. So my image will occupy the right-hand side of the screen. And I can actually now use that as a guide when I'm importing my images. So let's go back to the document. And you see the guide is there. It appears like a light green. Let's go ahead, a light green line. Let's go ahead and select those 4. And now that I am aligned to that particular line, I can go ahead and make sure that all of my images match perfectly fine when I bring them in. Let's go ahead and there's that. And and press this one as well. Boom, there it is. So they all now match on the left hand side. But they're also cut off. So if I press W, you'll notice that my images don't necessarily show in the best possible format. They're not, I would like to see more of the panna cotta being centered. So in order to fix that, what I want to do is I want to select the frames, and I want to go ahead and from the fitting, right click on them, go to fitting, and when I'm fitting them, I want to make sure that I click on content aware fit. And that is going to take a second to think, and it's going to place the image in what the program determines to be the best visible option based on the frame size for that image in that particular frame. So let's right click on this one and then save it. Now, if you want to get this to be more precise, you might want to go back to each one of the frames and resize the frames so that they perfectly fit the area that you wanted them to fit on the application. Right click, fit, and then say content aware. Control Alt X is the shortcut for this. So I'm going to do that for each one of these. I'm going to go ahead and resize that container. Control Alt X is going to give me the best content aware setting for that. Let's see, boom, boom, Control Alt X. Actually, the cinnamon rolls look pretty good the way they were, but that's what the program determines that is the best. And if you don't like it, Control Alt X for this one. If you don't like the way it's been set up for you, you can always go to the center of that image and use that white circle. Remember, that white circle allows you to move the content without changing the actual container. So if you're doing this, you can reposition to your liking. If you didn't like what the content aware option gave you, then you can always go ahead and resize and replay and relocate the image to your liking, to what you had envisioned, or to the best way of showcasing what you want people to see from your photograph. So now I just press Control 0 on the keyboard to center my document. And if I go across all these pages, I see that they're all pretty much set up, and all they're waiting for is actual content to place my text on the left-hand side right in this area. But before I do that, I want to test this document to see if I'm in the right track. So to do that, what I want to do is I want to go to the first page, make sure that I'm on the first page. Then I want to close my Pages window, and then I want to open up the EPUB Interactivity Preview window that I asked you to open up earlier. Then I want to click on this icon down here, the rightmost, bottommost icon, which is to preview the entire document. So in this previewing tool, you have the ability to preview what you have on the screen right now, which is this option. Just look at the spread that you have open, whatever page you have open right now, or you can look at the entire document. Now, if you have a very large document, then the preview is going to take quite a while to create. But so in that case, just do one page at a time. But if you have a short document like what we have right now, then I would suggest that you see the entire thing every time so that you make sure that you preview absolutely everything. Then to preview it, hit on the play preview button on the left hand side and wait for it to load. It's going to say it's going to create some HTML document on the background, and there it is, your document. This is how your document will look in your device. You'll notice that as I roll over the buttons, they change color. So the rollover state is working just fine. And if I click on the next button, I go to the next page. If I click on the previous button, it goes to the previous page. Therefore, my navigation is working just fine. The problem is that once I get past this point, I have nothing else to get past that point. So I have no more content before this or after this. So I need to remove those buttons so that I don't mislead my users. So let's go ahead and stop the preview. Close that interactivity window, and let's see how we can overwrite these buttons from the master page. And if I recall correctly, I had shown you in a previous video that to overwrite any elements that are part of the master page, all you need to do is select the item that you want to overwrite, or put your mouse over the item that you want to overwrite, and then press the Control, Shift, or Command Shift keys on the Mac, and click on the item that you want to override. So if I press Control and Shift at the same time, and then I click on that button, it gets disconnected from the master page. So it's no longer being controlled by the master page. And if I delete it, basically it's gone from my first page. I no longer have that button. Now, if I go to the last page on this document and I remove the next page because there's nothing going to be past this point, press Control Shift and click on it, I have disconnected it from the master page, and now I can go ahead and delete the button, and I can now preview my navigation, and my users will no longer have those buttons that might misguide them to go previous or past. See, in this point, I have nothing there to click on, so my user will never know that this is the beginning of the document or that there's nothing behind that point. And if I go forward or backward, you will notice that my pages, my other pages, contain both buttons of navigation, and then my last one contains only one button to allow you to go back. So this is how you create, number one, buttons for simple navigation across pages, and also how you apply navigation from page to page, which is the most linear, most simple way of creating navigation in InDesign, or of creating interactive navigation in InDesign.